Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this this particular session on Union Budget 2023. And we are going to analyze this today. And thank you so very much, IMS Learning, for giving me this opportunity to discuss the budget. So now I am your facilitator today. My name is Monika Goel. I work as a professor and dean with Faculty of Commerce, Manav Rachn International Institute of Research and Studies at Faridabad. Now, I hope everybody has gone through the budget in the newspaper or must have watched it on television on 1st of February. So today we are going to just analyze it as to what this particular budget has in store for all of us. Now, when we talk about budget, then definitely we talk about the revenue and the expenditure. That is what the budget is supposed to be. In the budget, we have been listening about that the finance minister has proposed to expand the capital expenditure. Now, I would just like to explain to you all that if the government wants to increase the capital expenditure, which the immediate effect of that would be that there would be a lot of infrastructure projects that would be coming up. They've already notified that 50 new airports will be coming up in the next year. Alongside that, they've also talked about a lot of development in the railways. A very high amount of budget has been allocated to railways as well. So let us now look at it as to what is the ideology of this budget and what is the objective that we are trying to achieve by expanding capital expenditure. You can see here that there is a table. Now, if you look at it, here in this particular table, we have presented to you the data starting from financial year 21, going to financial year 22, and the revised estimates of financial year 23. Along with that, we have some estimates which are given in the budget for financial year 24. Now, we are trying to just understand as to what is the direction of this budget. Now, if you look at as a percentage of GDP, the gross tax revenues have been in the range of 10.24%. It has increased from financial year 21 from 10.24% to 11.45%. And when we look at the revised estimates, we are trying to keep the gross tax revenues as a percentage of revised estimates at the range of 11.14%. Now, why we are going to do this is because government has in this budget reduced the taxability, the tax implications. The income tax slab has been increased, then the rates, the slabs, otherwise also the percentages have also been increased. So government is expecting that the revenue collection would remain almost in the range of 7.63 to 7.64% as a percentage of GDP. So that means that they're not expecting any major increase in the revenue. And if you look at the total, non-tax revenues, again, there is because there has been a lot of, what do you call it? The privatization has happened for a lot of PSUs, etc. So when we talk about non-tax revenues, we're talking about those revenues which are coming from like some of the PSUs or some of the government departments like railways. It has already, then you have some of the other departments of the government. So we are seeing that the revenue coming from non-tax sources is also kind of stagnant as a percentage of GDP as 1% only. But when we look at the non-debt capital receipts, now here government has slightly tried to increase that, okay, there would be some debt, some non-debt capital receipts. So that could be by way of some kind of disinvestments that can come. And the fiscal deficit target. Now, this is something which is very, very, very important and interesting to note, that fiscal deficit is proposed to be reduced from 9.18% to 5.92%. Now, in the financial year 21-22, we had a very high impact of COVID. And because of that, it was considered wise that government should increase the fiscal deficit. But I just want to, make sure that you know what is fiscal deficit. Now, those who know what is fiscal deficit, if you can raise your hand so that I can keep my level accordingly. I would not, yeah, okay, fantastic. All of you know what is fiscal deficit. So that's really good. I'm very happy to know that. Thank you. So when we are talking about keeping the fiscal deficit reducing, now, of course, in the Corona year, our fiscal deficit was very high. We did not have any choice because at that time government needed to support the people in general. But over a period of time, now we have reduced our fiscal deficit and we propose to go a little more lower to 5.92%. Now these are your, so if you look at the sources of revenue, they are tax revenues, non-tax revenues, and some non-debt capital receipts. When we come to the total expenditure, now when you look at the total expenditure, and we divide it into two parts, revenue expenditure is proposed to be reduced from, from the range of 15% to around 11%, which is like significant reduction as a percentage of GDP. But if you look at this number, when you look at it in the absolute terms, so they've not reduced the quantum of revenue expenditure because GDP is proposed to be increased. So as a percentage, it is going to come down, but in absolute number, your revenue expenditure is going to remain at a stagnant level. But if you look at the capital expenditure, government is proposing to increase the capital expenditure from 2.15% to 3.32%. Now, if you look at the year-on-year growth, here you will see that the capital expenditure is proposed to be increased by 37.4%. Now, this is something that was that was quite emphasized by the finance minister in the budget speech as well, that they proposed to increase the capital expenditure on an year-on-year basis by 37.14%, whereas we are increasing the revenue expenditure only by 1.2%, if you look at the year-on-year. So therefore, a very large portion of fiscal deficit. Now, when you look at fiscal deficit, which is going to be 5.92%, a very large portion of that is going to be incurred on the capital expenditure, because revenue expenditure is slated to grow only by 1.2%. So therefore, we can see the ideology, we can see the thought process of the government, that the thought process of the government is to increase capital expenditure. Here, when they were talking about the collections from the non-tax revenues, etc., so they said that, one is that the major subsidies that they're giving on food, fertilizer, and petroleum, they are budgeted to fall as the global commodity prices are expected to moderate. Now, here, if you just look at the way they have very, what we can say is very strategically and very in a very interesting manner, they have estimated that the petrol prices, the global crude prices are going to moderate, they're going to come down. And therefore, the government's subsidy towards this sector, which is a major outlay of the government, is going to reduce in financial year 24. So government will have some kind of a leeway, which will help them in reducing the fiscal deficit. Right? So the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio, as if we look at here in this slide, you will see that it is just going to be 5.9%, and it is going to reduce by 0.5%. Nominal GDP growth rate is expected to be 10.5%, in financial year 24, which is going to be down from 15.4%. Now, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Like, when we say nominal GDP growth is going to go down. Now, when we talk about nominal, here we say that it is not inflation adjusted. So if we can actually reduce the inflation, then even this reduction in nominal GDP growth rate is not going to impact the economy adversely. Why? Because we are looking for inflation adjusted growth. And we're not because we want to control inflation now that we have supported our economy for the last 3 years because of COVID. There has been a lot of fiscal deficit. There has been a lot of inflation also. It is now the time that the government stabilizes or slightly reduces the interest rates and is able to take the gear back and move on the growth trajectory. So now, as we said, the growth of revenue expenditure is pegged at only 1.2%. And government is trying to increase the capital expenditure. So with the capital expenditure, the government is trying to incur expenditure in favor of non-defense expenditure, which has a higher multiplier effect. So capital expenditure you can incur in two things. One is on the defense side and second is on non-defense side. In this budget, we are expecting that there's going to be an increase to 15% over in the financial year 2024 over the financial year 2023. Now, moving to the next. So I hope it is clear when I'm talking about capital expenditure, I said that majorly in this budget, they're focused on non-defense expenditure, which will lead to employment, which will lead to income, which will lead to a lot of growth story for the country. Now, coming to fiscal consolidation. Now, what is this fiscal consolidation? Now, if you look at government debt to GDP ratio, So I have explained to you what is government debt. I hope you're clear what is government debt now. Now, when we are talking about the fiscal consolidation, if you look at government debt to GDP ratio, you will see that in financial year 20, the debt to GDP ratio was 50%, increased to 61% in 21, 57.3% in 22, and it is still increasing. So what I'm trying to say is government debt is increasing as a percentage of GDP. And because government debt is increasing, definitely there will be a pressure for interest payments as well. There is a pressure for increase in interest payments as well. Now here, over a period of time, if we are talking about financial year 25 and financial year 26, we want that this government debt as a percentage of GDP should come down. And over a period of time, government should reduce its issuance of government securities. So this particular budget, they're planning to achieve this target. It is designed in such a manner. We hope that the government would be able to achieve its milestones and would be able to, go ahead. Now, this was all about the big changes which have come from the perspective of revenue expenditure and capital expenditure and total tax revenue that the government is planning that it would be able to generate. Now, when I'm talking to you about increasing tax revenue, now increasing tax revenue, rather not the increasing tax revenue, but when I'm talking to you about tax revenues, then the source of tax revenue is direct taxes and indirect taxes, right? Now we have to look at what are the changes which have been brought in this budget with respect to direct taxes, and what are the changes which have been proposed in the area of indirect taxes, and how it is going to impact the tax revenue collection. Now, in the last budget, last to last budget, our finance minister had come up with a concessional tax regime, which was also called the new tax regime. How many of you are aware about the new tax regime and the old tax regime and the differences between the two? Yeah, we have some people who have raised their hands. Fantastic. Fantastic. Good. So few of you know what is the difference between the old tax regime and the new tax regime. Let me explain to you in a minute, and then we'll take the discussion forward. Now, what happened was that in income tax, we have had one tax regime. Now, what does that mean? That, okay, if your income is, now, if you look at the tax rates, if your income is up to, say, 2.5 lakh rupees, you're not required to pay any taxes. But if your income is between 2.5 to 5 lakh rupees, you're required to pay 5%. And if your income is between 5 to 10 lakhs, then you're required to pay 10%. So all this gets accumulated. So if I have an income of 10 lakh rupees, I'm talking about before this budget, if I had an income of 10 lakh rupees, I was required to pay, up to 2,50,000, 0%. From 2,50,000 to 5 lakhs, 5%. So that means it comes around on 2.5 lakhs. If I'm paying 5%, so that is coming to around how much? Some 7,000 rupees, something. And then if then the next tax bracket was between 5 lakhs to 10 lakhs. So that was 20%. I was required to pay 1 lakh rupees. So if I have my income of 10 lakh rupees, I was required to pay 1 lakh plus 12,500. That was, so 12,500 plus 1 lakh. So that is 1,12,500 rupees. Alongside that, I was also allowed to claim a lot of deductions. Deductions means that if I'm living in a if I'm investing in my provident fund, if I'm investing in my government securities, I was able to claim the deduction. So that amount of money up to rupees 1.5 lakhs, if I was investing in some securities under Section 80C, I was not required to pay tax on that amount, and accordingly my slab was required to be calculated. That was the old tax regime, where we were able to claim some deductions for investments, deductions for education loan, deductions for buying an electric vehicle, deductions, for many deductions for taking a medical insurance, etc. 2 years ago, our finance minister had come up with a concessional tax regime, where they said that, okay, if you do not claim any deductions, we will reduce the slab. So the slab was under the concessional tax regime. The slab was that if you have an income up to 2.5 lakhs, you're not required to pay any tax. If your income is between 2.5 to 5, you pay 5%. From 5 to 7.5, it was 10%. From 7.5 to 10, it was 15%. This was under the concessional tax regime where you could not claim any deductions, right? Now, this budget, government has changed this rate under the concessional tax regime only, not under the old tax regime. Under the concessional tax regime now, if you have an income up to rupees 3 lakhs, you do not pay any tax. From 3 to 6, you do not, you pay only 5%. From 6 to 9, 10%. From 9 to 12, 15%. From 12 to 15, it is 20%. And above 15, it is 30%. So if I look at it, there is a shift. Now the rates have been reduced. My tax liability has been reduced, but this reduction is only in the concessional tax regime. It is not in the old tax regime. So that means that government wants the people to move from the old tax regime to the concessional tax regime. Government does not want to give you the benefit of deductions. And this concessional tax regime will be the default regime going forward. So what government wants to say is that we are going to calculate your tax. Now, okay, when we talk about default regime, now what does that mean? Presently, if I had to opt for, I had to, file a form, or I had to intimate the government that, look, I am going for the new tax regime. Going forward, I will have to inform that, look, I would be remaining in the old tax regime. So when we say that this is going to be the default regime, that means that I'm not required to inform to the government that I'm opting for this. No, rather I will have to inform when I decide to pay my taxes under the old tax regime. If you do the calculations, this is going to be, it seems like for any kind of a middle class person, now going forward, the new tax regime or the concessional tax regime is going to be more beneficial. If you are investing, say, up to 3 to 4 lakh rupees in a year, because beyond that, there are not many investment options, you do not get any benefit to remain in the old tax regime. On top of it, they have said that, for those who are in the very high tax bracket, earlier there was a surcharge. Still, the surcharge is going to be there. But if you had income above rupees 50 lakhs, you were required to pay 10% over and above your tax liability. So if your tax liability was, say, rupees 5 lakhs, you were required to pay 5 lakh 50,000 if your income was above 50 lakh rupees. If your income was above 1 crore rupees, then you were required to pay not 5 lakhs, you were required to pay 15% over that. So 75,000, 5 lakh 75,000. If your income was above 2 crores, then going forward, it was increasing. Now, in this surcharge rate, it has been capped at above 2 crores. So there is no additional tax if your income is above 5 crores also. So this has been removed, and this has given the benefit even to the very high income holders. They would be now saved by around, if you take it, because this is a tax on tax. So effective change, earlier they were paying around 42%. Now they would be paying around 39% of the tax by doing the calculations. Another change which has, and health and education says, as earlier was 4%. This is kept as 4% only. Standard deduction, which was there on salary of rupees 50,000, which was earlier there only in the old tax regime. Now it is coming in the concessional tax regime as well. So this is again a big change. This is going to help people to move from the old tax regime to the new tax regime. And one thing which has also been added is that earlier also it was there that if you had income up to rupees 5 lakhs, then in none of the, that means that if your income is only up to rupees 5 lakhs, so then you would not require to pay any taxes. That limit has been increased from 5 lakhs to 7 lakhs. So if I have an income of only up to rupees 7 lakhs, I am not required to pay any tax to the government. My taxability starts only if I have income more than rupees 7 lakhs. Then this slab will be used to calculate my tax liability. The object, when we talk about the entire thought process. So there are certain questions which are coming from the perspective of that it should not lead to reduction in tax revenue. Government wants to widen the tax base. So when we talk about revenue, revenue comes from collecting from a few people, and revenue can also come from collecting lesser amount for larger number of people. So in this budget, they've tried to widen the tax base, lower the tax rates. Ultimately, the money that will be there in the hand of the government will be almost a similar amount or maybe slightly higher than that. So that ways, what I'm looking at is it's not going to reduce government's kitty in any manner. So there are a lot of proposals in the budget which are going to talk about widening the tax base. So when I say widening the tax base, I mean to say that the number of people who would be paying taxes would be increased by certain procedural changes which are coming now. If you look at the, one example over here is TCS is increased from 5% to 20% on overseas tour packages and overseas remittances other than education and medical treatment. So that means if I'm planning to travel abroad, and I want to buy some foreign exchange, I am required to pay TCS, which is tax collected at source. Now, government knows that I'm traveling abroad and 20% of TCS has been increased from 5 to 20%. Imagine the amount of tax which is going to be there, and this will be with the government. When I file my income tax return, definitely I would be able to claim a set off of this. But everybody who's traveling abroad, because these days even people who are not filing their returns of their return of income in India are traveling abroad. So government gets to know that who all are these people who afford to travel abroad, and they would be able to get, those people in the tax net. So these are some of the ways which are, by which government would be increasing the tax base. I'm just giving you some examples here. And by reducing the tax slab, that's how actually the system should be. Alongside, we are also promoting investments coming to IFSCs in India. So that's going to be a very good thing. So we need foreign capital. Now, someone who's also asking that how does the government manage with the fiscal deficit, etc. So there are ways, if this story becomes very, very, spiral over a period of time, and that was the reason we had gone for this thing, liberalization and globalization, because at that time continuously over the years we had a lot of fiscal deficit and we were not able to pay back. So how could we pay back? By encouraging investments from outside India to our country. So thereby you have flight of capital coming into your country, which whereby government is able to increase its revenues. So encouraging investments is going to be one more thing. Another way of encouraging investment and employing the youth is giving a lot of reliefs to startups. We are a country which is like the finance minister said, that we are considered as third in the world with respect to our startup culture. So this is going to be there is a relief which has been given, which has been extended, rather I would say, which was already there to the startups, which has been extended from 7 years to 10 years. So that benefit has come. Alongside, there has been a lot of rationalization which has been brought in. So when we talk about Finance Act, we also talk about that, how governance will happen. So now, in between government, what it had done was that earlier, the time limit for completion of assessment. Now, what is assessment? Let me take a minute to explain that. What happens is you earn your income, you pay taxes simultaneously by way of TDS or by way of advance tax. After the entire year, so for the financial year 22-23, you are presently paying your taxes. After 31st March, you will file your return of income. Once you file your return of income, that return of income will be assessed by the income tax department. So the time limit for completion of that assessment was reduced last year from 12 months to 9 months. So it was decided that all assessments should be completed by the month of December. So this year for 22-23, we finished our assessments on December 2022. But it might have been realized that this is practically not possible. So again, the time limit of assessment has been increased from 9 months to 12 months. These are again rationalization measures like reassessment proceedings. What is reassessment is something that I must tell you. I'm going a little fast because time is very limited with us. Reassessment means that if government has got various ways of assessment. So some of them are like straight through processing. You file your return, they just check the mathematics of your return and they said, okay, return has been processed. And then thereafter, they pick up some of the returns for scrutiny, for detailed checking. So in that case, a notice is sent and for that a period has been specified. Now, minimum time of 3 months is available for filing tax return in response to a reassessment notice. So whenever a reassessment notice is sent to a taxpayer, the taxpayer is given some time to again file his return of income. So this period has been increased from 1 month to 3 months. So a lot of these are all procedural things. I don't think so this particular group is required to know all these details with respect to taxation. So therefore, I'm moving to the next thing. So a lot of rationalization measures have been brought in this budget. And coming to the last area, which is indirect taxation. In our country, tax is collected by two methods, direct taxes and indirect taxes. Someone was asking me that, ma'am, what are direct taxes and what are indirect taxes? Direct taxes are taxes which the government collects by way of income tax directly from your income. So the day you earn, before you get your money from your employer or from your service recipient, a tax is deducted and the money is paid to the government and then you get your own money. However, so that is called income tax, that is called direct tax. However, then when you get your money and when you go to the shop, you buy something, some goods or services, you're required to pay GST. That's an indirect tax. Why it is indirect tax? Because it is not directly collected from you, though it's going from your pocket only, but you're not directly paying it to the government. You're first paying it to that shopkeeper, to that service provider, who is ultimately required to pay to the government. So it is collected indirectly. When we talk about the budget included proposals both for direct and indirect taxes. There were major changes in direct taxes and minor changes in GST, which is an indirect tax, because every year, many a times in the year, almost after every 2-3 months, there is a GST council which has got the representation of all the state governments as well as the central government. So GST council actually decides the changes with respect to GST. So these proposals are only the changes with respect to the GST law. But when we talk about the GST rates or when we talk about any other recommendations with respect to procedures, that is done by the GST council. So therefore, rationalization, etc., is handled at the GST council level. Finance minister here, the finance minister is also the chairperson of the GST council. In this budget, they had only a few clarificatory changes with respect to GST. One was that I hope you know what is corporate social responsibility. So, as a corporate social responsibility, it is the responsibility of the companies to look after the society. So as a policy, as a law, all the companies which have a turnover more than a specified limit or have got a net worth more than that or have got profitability beyond a certain point of time, certain amount, they are required to spend minimum 5% of their average profits towards corporate social responsibility. Now, the question was that in GST, GST is a law which is like anybody, where the tax is charged only from the ultimate consumer of the product or service. So the entire value chain in between gets the benefit of input tax credit. All the businesses, they get the benefit of input tax credit. Now, the question, there has been a lot of dispute around whether the expenses that the companies are incurring on corporate social responsibility, can they claim input tax credit on that? So on this, the finance minister has clarified that input tax credit will not be given for corporate social responsibility. This is not very highly appreciated by the industry, but yes, that has been a change. Similarly, there was again, these are more technical proposals. As I said, it's not something which will be understood by or which has to cater to everybody. Most of these changes are impacting the businesses. Similarly, when we talk about supply of warehouse goods prior to clearance for home consumption, now this is again looking very technical. It's like when you import goods in the country, you've got two choices. I'm talking about for business purposes if you're importing. One is you can keep it in the warehouse, and from the warehouse also you can decide to sell it to someone, or you can import and you can clear it and keep it in your own warehouse and then sell it. So till the time the goods are in the customs warehouse, they are considered to be outside the territory of India. Now here, you know, if the goods are supplied from the warehouse prior to clearance for home consumption, they would be considered as exempt supply and all expenses. Now, their earlier government had considered it as non-GST. Now they've given again a clarification. So these are some of the very, very technical areas. We would not be going in those. Now, who is an e-commerce operator? E-commerce operator are these Amazon, Flipkart, Zomato, etc., etc. So there are some changes which are going to come in for the e-commerce operators, because this is an industry which is really growing very fast, and this is the industry which is getting our complete unorganized sector on it. So there are a lot of changes. There were a lot of restrictions actually for these unorganized operators to come on the e-commerce platforms. By doing these changes, like here, now the government has given a permission that composition dealers can make the intra-state supply through e-commerce operators. Now, this is a small change, but this really helps. Now, if I'm in composition, now what is composition again? Composition scheme is a scheme which is available to small businesses in GST, and there was a restriction that anybody who opts for the composition scheme cannot sell its goods on e-commerce platforms. Now this restriction has been removed, and now even those who are small businesses in composition scheme, they can also sell their goods on the e-commerce platforms. So these are, some of the changes. More on GST, it's more like business oriented, etc. So with this, I think I have already exceeded my time. I was given time up to 6:45. So this is brief about the changes in the budget. Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was an absolutely great session. I mean, the energy with which you explained the whole thing was really great, and I'm sure the students have gained a lot of insight into the budget and the whole subject. So, thank you, and it was great having you here for this session.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. And I would like to take your leave. Thank you, everybody. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much.